Hey guys, it's Sagar, and in this video, let us try and find out whether dual cameras on the iPhone 13 mini stand up against the triple cameras on the iPhone 14 Pro. In my last video, I compared cameras on the iPhone 14 with the 14 Pro, and other than the telephoto lens and wide-angle lens being able to take macro shots, we didn't really see too many noteworthy differences in their cameras. Right now, iPhone 13 is the most affordable of the entire 13 series iPhones, and the 14 Pro is almost on the other end of that spectrum. 14 Pro obviously has the best set of cameras on any iPhone yet, but since it costs a lot, not everyone can afford it. Many people just want to get the iPhone 13 or the 13 mini because of its price, and all they want to know is how good or bad its cameras are compared to the iPhone 14 Pro. This video is going to help you figure that out. Actually, I had both the iPhone 13 and 13 mini with me, and since both of them have the same set of cameras, some of the images in this comparison are from the iPhone 13 while others are from the iPhone 13 mini. I have uploaded individual camera reviews of both these phones, so if you guys want to check out some more image and video samples from these phones, you guys should definitely check those videos out. Before we get to the image and video samples, let us take a quick look at cameras that we are working with. If you guys want to skip over this information, you can head straight to the image and video samples from the chapters on the timeline of this video. iPhone 13 and 13 mini get only two cameras on the back, both of which get a 12 megapixel sensor. Main camera gets f1.6 aperture, 26mm lens and sensor shift image stabilization. Then there's the ultra wide angle camera, which gets f2.4 aperture and a 13mm lens. iPhone 14 has three cameras on its back. Primary camera now comes with an even larger 48 megapixel sensor with f1.8 aperture, 24mm lens and sensor shift image stabilization. Second camera gets a 12 megapixel sensor with f2.2 aperture, 13mm ultra wide angle lens and autofocus, so this one can take macro shots as well. And the final camera on its back gets another 12 megapixel sensor with f2.2 aperture, 77mm telephoto lens and optical image stabilization. At the front, both of them get 12 megapixel true depth cameras. One on the 13 comes with f2.2 aperture and 23mm wide lens, while the iPhone 14 Pro gets a newer slightly bigger image sensor and f1.9 aperture. With these specifications out of the way, let us now check out the image and video samples from both these phones, starting with the bright daytime ones. Right away, we can't say that one of these images is better than the other, and this in itself is a big win for the iPhone 13 mini upfront. At a first look, these images seem to be clicked with the same camera, which means Apple has done an excellent job of matching the color cyans on both these phones. If we look closer, we see images from the iPhone 14 Pro being ever so slightly sharper, but not by a huge margin. Although these ones are clicked with a 48 megapixel sensor on the iPhone 14 Pro, in the default mode, it captures these images in the 12 megapixel bin mode. One of the things that some of you might have noticed is that the iPhone 14 Pro captures 2mm wider scene than the main camera on the iPhone 13. I know that 2mm is too small of a difference to notice, but if you are ever in the need of that slight extra space, iPhone 14 Pro has you covered. By the way, if you are wondering, most of these images have been clicked in Hyderabad, and a few which we will see a bit later on are from some parts of Pune. Once we get indoors, we see the iPhone 14 Pro capturing a bit more details. In some of the images, this is clearly visible, while in others, you will have to zoom in a bit to notice this difference. In some of the shots, iPhone 13 and 13 mini tend to capture slight more warmth than the iPhone 14 Pro. But just like with everything that we have seen so far, this difference is very little and you must be actively looking for it to even notice this. Now it has been a few years since Apple is not doing all that well with the dynamic range in their shots. Before the iPhone 13, we got a toggle to turn the HDR mode on and off, but this has been missing on the iPhone 13 and 14 series, and frankly, I don't think that these phones capture the best dynamic range anymore. If I had any other phones with me, I am certain that these images which demand the higher dynamic range processing would have turned out so much better. That being said, 14 Pro seems to be doing slightly better than the iPhone 13, which seems to be adding a foggy layer on the entire shot. I checked and cleaned the camera lens with a microfiber cloth, but I got similar results. Both these phones do really well when the lighting is nice and even, but give them a slightly challenging situation and both fail miserably. In this set of images, both did well with the indoor elements, but look outside the window. It was bright and sunny outside and both the phones just blew up all those highlights. Yes, there are times when both these phones capture good dynamic range like in this shot, but this is like a once in a blue moon type thing. You wish it would occur more often, but it doesn't. Coming to the close-up shots. If you saw my iPhone 14 Pro's camera review or its comparison with the iPhone 14, you must know that the iPhone 14 Pro really struggles while taking close-up shots. The minimum focusing distance on its main camera is really bad. iPhone 13 can get so much closer to the subject, while the iPhone 14 Pro has to be much further behind. You can see it clearly in this set of images. Both the phones were held at the same place and the iPhone 13 could focus at this point, whereas the closest 14 Pro can set its focus is much further away. You can switch to the 2x mode on the iPhone 14 Pro and that definitely helps a bit with the close-up shots. But then you will always have to remember to take the extra step before clicking your shot, which becomes a bit cumbersome if you take a lot of close-up shots. For this reason alone, I would much rather prefer to take my close-up shots with the iPhone 13 and 13 mini. iPhone 14 Pro, however, gets the option of taking macro shots with its ultra-wide-angle camera. The 13 and 13 mini don't have this feature. When you switch to the macro mode, you can get this much closer to your subject. All these are 12 megapixel macro shots, so they have plenty of details in them. Speaking of the ultra-wide-angle lens, here are how those shots look from both the phones. On the face of it, both of them have 12 megapixel sensors behind this lens, but one on the 14 Pro is twice as big as the one on the 13 Pro, which is already bigger than the one on the iPhone 13. What this means is iPhone 14 Pro's ultra-wide-angle shots have more details than the ones from the iPhone 13. These extra details are visible even without zooming in on these images. That being said, ones from the iPhone 13 don't look all that bad. In fact, it is also doing an excellent job with these wide shots. The bigger sensor on the 14 Pro is more useful in these indoor situations. As you can see, 14 Pro's image has less noise overall. I understand that people don't switch to the wide lens on their phones all that often, but you should know that it comes in very handy when you want to capture a wider scene and you don't have any space to move back. One of the areas where the iPhone 14 Pro clearly shines is while taking high resolution shots. It is actually the only one who gets a 48 megapixel sensor, so the 13 mini and 13 can't even take these high resolution shots. Just for reference, here is a 48 megapixel shot from the iPhone 14 Pro compared with the 12 megapixel one from the 13 mini. If I zoom in even a bit, you can see how the iPhone 13 mini's image starts falling apart and looks pixelated, while the 14 Pro's image holds on to so much more details in its shot. This comes in very handy when you want to capture images of some landscape or architecture, because that is when you would want to preserve every minute detail in each of your shot. These shots also come in handy when you want to zoom in and compose your shot in a different way after you have clicked it. That being said, these high resolution shots are in ProRAW format, so each image can end up being well over 100 MB in size, which is way bigger than the 12 megapixel shot of the iPhone 13 and 13 mini. What this means is, if you click a lot of images in the 48 megapixel mode on the 14 Pro, you might run out of the internal storage on your phone way sooner. So I suggest sticking to the default 12 megapixel mode for most of your everyday shots on the 14 Pro. Now because the iPhone 14 Pro gets a LiDAR sensor, which is supposed to help it with better HD detection while taking portrait shots, I was expecting the 14 Pro to be way ahead while taking portrait shots. But in reality, we don't see that huge of a difference between the portraits from both these phones. Yes, the edges are slightly more refined from the 14 Pro and it does detect the edges a few milliseconds faster than the 13, but that is pretty much the only difference. I'm sure for most people, both these portrait shots look almost identical. If you zoom in or look a bit closer, faces in the iPhone 14 Pro's portrait shots look a bit sharper, but I don't think anyone will notice this while they are looking at these images on two separate phones. In some of the shots, I even feel like the iPhone 13 has captured better looking skin tones and overall colors. 14 Pro's edge detection feels a bit better, and the LiDAR sensor seems to be having a bigger difference when I was clicking portrait shots of objects. I know most people don't even do this, but if you're like me and you like to take portrait shots of objects, 14 Pro will be doing a slightly better job with it. That brings us to the images which are taken indoors, artificial and lower lighting conditions. As the light goes down, the phone with a bigger image sensor will start taking better and sharper looking images, and in this case, that is the iPhone 14 Pro. Its main image sensor is over 2 times as big as on the iPhone 13, and that means it has bigger individual pixels when it is capturing images in the 12 megapixel bin mode. This is visible in its images as we zoom in on both the shots. You can see one from the iPhone 14 Pro having more details in this painting and even in the light fixture above it. This is true for most of the images in these lighting conditions. That being said, main camera on the iPhone 13 is not too far behind. Frankly, if you don't zoom in on these images, it might even be difficult to say which one did a better job. Both the phones move on to the deep fusion mode for taking these images when the light is lower than it is during the daytime, but not as low for the night mode to kick in. As I mentioned before, Apple changed the image processing a bit on the 14 series, and because of that, the deep fusion algorithm is now applied at a much earlier stage on the 14 Pro, making its images look more detailed. Both phones switch to the night mode once the light gets as low as this. Now because 14 Pro has a bigger image sensor and wide aperture, I found that it doesn't switch to the night mode as often as the 13 or 13 mini does. And when it does switch to the night mode, its exposure time is consistently lower than that of the iPhone 13 or the 13 mini. For example, iPhone 13 has the shutter open for 2 seconds while capturing this shot, while the 14 Pro just had it open for 1 second. And during that time, it even ended up capturing more light and details in its shot. When there is plenty of ambient light, like in this shot, both the phones will do really well and capture a lot of information. You will barely see any difference in these images. I mean, other than the frame on the iPhone 14 Pro being slightly wider. But when you get to even lower light, 14 Pro is definitely the one taking better images. So if you take most of your images when the light is much lower, then you will really enjoy using the cameras on this iPhone 14 Pro. Wide lenses on both these phones can take images in lower light, and one on the iPhone 13 and 13 mini don't do all that well in these lighting conditions. Even with the night mode turned on, these images are way behind the ones from the iPhone 14 Pro, which are not only brighter but even have lot more details as you can see here. I don't really suggest taking images with your phone when the light is this low. But if you are ever in the situation when you just need to take a few quick shots, cameras on the iPhone 14 Pro will do a much better job in such low light. That brings us to the front-facing cameras. Both these shots are captured with 12 megapixel cameras, but thanks to a newer image processing algorithm on the iPhone 14 Pro, its selfies look noticeably sharper and seem to have a bit more definition. Edge detection for portrait selfies is just the same on both, and I think both of them can use a bit of refinement via software updates. But again, the faces seem to be a bit sharper in the selfies from the iPhone 14 Pro. Here's a video from the front-facing camera of the iPhone 13 and the iPhone 14 Pro. You can see how both these phones are handling the overall colors of the scene, exposure, and stabilization when I'm walking around with them. Both can also shoot cinematic mode videos with all the cameras. On the iPhone 13, it is limited at 1080p, while on the 14 Pro, you can shoot 4K videos with it. For shooting videos, all the resolution and frame rate options are similar on both the phones. And to be fair, these videos look almost identical. For quite a few years, iPhones have been the best when it comes to shooting videos, and somehow Apple makes sure that no matter the price point of these phones, these videos look just as crisp and smooth. As you can see here, iPhone 13 mini's videos are just as smooth and good looking as the videos from the iPhone 14 Pro. Since it gets a telephoto lens and has macro shooting abilities, it can even take videos in these modes which the iPhone 13 and 13 mini can't. But other than that, you can choose either of these phones and they will take equally good looking videos. I am really surprised with the results of this camera comparison. In my last video, we didn't really see that big of a difference between the images from the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, but both those phones are from the same generation. And since the iPhone 13 and 13 mini are a generation older, I was expecting to see a much bigger gap between their and the iPhone 14 Pro's cameras. The only real noticeable difference is in low light and from the wide lens, and the fact that the 14 Pro has extra reach thanks to telephoto lens and the ability to take 48 megapixel shots when needed. If you pixel peep on each of these images, then you will definitely find some extra details on the iPhone 14 Pro's images. But honestly, if you are an average user or even a smartphone photography enthusiast, you will be just as happy with the images from the iPhone 13 and 13 mini, and at the same time you will also be saving a bunch of cash, especially if you are in a country like India, where the price gap between these phones is almost unreasonable. You can go with the iPhone 14 Pro if you absolutely need the bigger image sensor, telephoto lens, macro shooting options, and the obvious other perks like the higher refresh rate display, dynamic island, newer processor, and the premium build quality. But if you are just looking for better camera features, I really don't think that the price premium Apple is asking for the iPhone 14 Pro is worth it. Since the last couple of months, I have completely stopped using the iPhone 14 Pro and I'm actually using the iPhone 13 mini as my main phone since. I love the compact form factor, I don't miss the high refresh rate display, and I definitely don't miss the extra bit of weight that the 14 Pro brought along. All in all, I am really happy with this iPhone 13 mini and I am actually going to keep on using it until the next iPhones arrive. After looking at these images, I am curious to hear your thoughts about these cameras, and if you had the money to go for either one of these phones, which one would you pick and why? Let me know in the comments. That is it for this video guys. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to the channel for a lot more quality tech videos like this. You can also check out some of the other videos from this channel. This has been Sagar and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care.